What is the potential of this crisis for the emergence of a 21st century economy? I'm Shinta Oosterwaal, economist and executive team coach, and I'm asking forward thinkers, seers and doers, what now? Hi Tanno.
Hi Shinta.
Thanks for spending some time with me today.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Me too, me too. I've been initiating these talks to be in dialogue about what potential comes forward from this crisis that we find ourselves in today.
Yeah, wonderful initiative.
Thank you so much. You're an international working executive coach and an executive team coach, and you have quite extensive experience with working with people on an individual level, and then also seeing how they impact the greater whole. So I'm very excited to learn from you today. As you know, I've set up these talks to offer a hopeful or carve out maybe a hopeful timeline towards a possible future. So I'm looking forward to our chat. And I have a question for you immediately, and that is, what's the emerging story of humankind that we see today? Big question.
It's a big question. And while thinking about our interview, I'm here in the Netherlands. I'm in the midst of in the centric of the pandemic. And my wife is a medical doctor, so it's a main topic during the whole day. So it's as in life, it's a kind of paradox. Thinking about what we can learn from this crisis while seeing the want in the midst of the crisis, right? So I had to organize it in my brain because I'm really hearing a lot through my wife on what's going on. But still, I think life is a paradox. So thinking about your question, I really want to make it small because at the end, it's all about interaction. And what I think that will emerge from this crisis, that our interaction will change, both as we see it now in a technological way, but also in a human being way. And I think that the way we interact with each other will change. I think that's for me the main outcome of this crisis, because for us as human being, sense making is very important. I always say sense making leads to being.
Yeah. How does that?
Sorry?
How does that work?
I think that works through interaction. And that's the only way. The only way that we can create meaning is having interaction with yourself, having interaction with the people around you, having interaction with life, having interaction with nature. And the outcome of the interaction with all those things I just mentioned will be your sense making of what's going on in our life, and even in your life. And that sense making makes how you act, and the way you act is at the end creating your reality, right? So if I go back to the sense making question through interaction, and how that influences the way we emerge as humankind because of this crisis, I think the paradox will still be there. When there was a water crisis in the Netherlands last century during the 90s, I lived in the middle of that crisis. and we were all together. There was water going through our houses, and we together with the military, we waked up at night and we started to fight the water, and we were all friends, and we were all bundled as in a spirit, even in a spiritual way, because we have to defend the water. And now you will notice that we are all together. We seek each other to share our emotions. But in the 90s, last century, when we defended the water and it was all over, we went back in our old patterns, and even didn't wave to each other like we didn't do that before we had to defend the water. And I think that will come back as in terms of emergency. We as a humankind, we want to connect. Connection gives us existence, and when it's unsafe, insecure, creating the connection will give you a feeling of safety.
Yeah.
But as soon as the unsafety, the insecurity is gone, I think a lot of people will go back into the old pattern of behavior and do the things they have done before. So we will notice that. But what we also will notice that we will make a shift in our thinking and will create new patterns. And we can focus on staying in the old patterns, because that will happen. People will go back to the way we behaved before the corona crisis. But there will also be a lot of people who are inspired by this interconnection we will experience now, and ask themselves, what can I do to keep that interconnection?
Yeah.
And I think that should be the main question. If we like your initiative, it helps us to be aware that it is about the interconnection after and now, but also after the virus. So how can we develop new patterns together in which that interconnection will emerge even after the coronavirus?
Yeah.
And for me, that's an individual responsibility. I have to take the responsibility to stay into that interconnection. You have to take that responsibility. But that also means that if I feel responsible for staying in the interconnection, I have to change my language. Because if I use language from the old world, from the world before the coronavirus, and I talk with you with using the old language, like still focus on finance, still focus too much on economics, still focus on me instead of us. When I talk with that kind of language with you, that will keep me in the old pattern. So we have to search for new language, and maybe even words we do not have right now for the new world. There is a lot of language like compassion already, but within a small group. People who are interested in that kind of themes even before the corona crisis. So how can we use languages like compassion, like love, like harmony, like connections and interconnectedness? How can we make those kind of language more common?
Yeah.
Because using that kind of language leads to a humankind that makes the next step in their thinking. And if we do not find a way to use this kind of language as a common language, we will go back to the old pattern.
Yeah.
So how do you think about that?
Well, I'm hearing you say a couple of very interesting things. So I'm hearing you say that this crisis, as painful as it is and as invasive as it is, also offers inspiration for new patterns to emerge, and that we have to take the individual responsibility to make that work in a way. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering about how would you take that? How would you advise on taking that individual responsibility? But I really enjoy the fact that you're linking it to using new language. Maybe it's not super new, but using the language that is
Make it
created
more,
new and
make it
making that
more
work.
common.
Exactly, make it more common. And I'm hearing you speak about compassion and empathy, and I can surely add a few, like trust, for example. So that's really a very interesting link, I think, and I'm really interested in so the individual responsibility,
Yeah.
how to take that now.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
your idea?
Well, first of all, it's an existential crisis, right? Which always, within an existential crisis, there's always emotions. Emotions like fear, anxiety, sadness, and those kind of emotions, you can react on that in two ways. It can stress you out and mirror your focus on surviving. Or, and I think that in terms of individual responsibilities, you can reflect on those existential emotions and what it means for you. And how it can give you, while reflecting on those emotions and have compassion for those emotions, how it can help you to get out of your own existential crisis and find a way forward in your own development. And I think that's where it starts. When of course you have to recognize those emotions because they are there. But if those emotions narrowing your focus down, you will stay in the old patterns. If you are open to those emotions and reflect on them and reflect on yourself and how to deal with those emotions, you will grow. Because fear and openness to fear and anxiety is always a wonderful way to reflect on yourself and to see how you react on those kind of emotions. Now,
So
at the
fear
moment that
actually also a so fear is actually also in this moment a chance.
it is, yeah. I think recognizing and adapting to those emotions is the way out for the humankind, instead of influenced by those emotions in a negative way, in a way that it narrows you down. So at the moment, and in terms of individual responsibility, I think the only one you can change is yourself. So you can pinpoint to the world, but if you do not change, the world will not change. So the only responsibility you have is to change yourself, and that starts with recognizing your existential emotions and how you deal with it. So that for me, that's the first step. What's going on, and how do I react on it? The next step is find answers on principal questions. A few days ago, I saw a movie that was about a person who was very happy. He had a good life, and then he heard he had cancer. And suddenly his life, the way he perceived his life, changed. And at the end he said, well, my life changed because I noticed that that is an option. And when that is an option, and it's a big theme, I started to think about, okay, if there is an end of life, do I live my life the way I wanted to? So, and for me, that's the next step, building focus, having a clear vision, what kind of role you want to play in your life. And that's the sense-making part.
Mm-hmm.
And having a clear answer on that, I cannot find those answers just within myself. I do that with an interaction with my environment.
Mm-hmm.
Like we do now. We can even change this conversation to our purpose in life, because when our purpose is not clear, why should I change?
Mm-hmm.
So having interaction with the people around you on what's important for you gives you focus to get out of this situation. So the first step is recognizing your fear and anxiety, and have compassion for them. And the next step is be open to specific life questions within yourself, within your environment, why life is important to you, how you want to live your life, how you want to interact with others. And there are slow questions. And what I mean with slow questions is that you do not have the answer directly. It's not you and I are in an interaction, and the outcome of the interaction is that I have a vision on my life. It's more about you and I have an interaction, and during the coming days, I reflect on our interaction and I get more insight. But it starts with asking each other those kind of questions.
Yeah.
And then the third step is finding different words which become common good. When we talk about specifically about compassion, and you do it with other person, like the coronavirus, right? The virus doesn't make us sick. Well, it makes us sick, but it's not. You and I created the virus because I'll give you a hand, and the virus jumps over to you, right? It's not just the virus; it is our interaction which creates the massive impact. So if we use in our interaction more and more and more new kind of words like compassion, like trust, and we behave like that, then it's like a virus also. It will jump from me to you, for you to your network, etc., etc., etc. So very concrete use of new words will be very important. And not just for the people who used it already before the crisis, but how can we build or create platforms in our communication in which those kind of words are common good.
Yeah. So I just briefly want to mention again the aspects that you've just mentioned now. So it's about becoming emotionally intelligent, as it would be in my words, reflecting on your emotions. Then you have answering your principal questions, which I really like, because one of the ideas that I had of doing these talks was to seek for ways to answer the question: in what world do I want to live in? And you're making it even more personal by saying, what is your purpose? How do you want to live your life? Which maybe makes it more tangible to deal with that kind of questions, those kind of questions. You're also speaking about the necessity for the relationship, and then finding different words to use. And you mentioned just
and live in that relationship, finding different words that you live in that relationship, and not only use in a verbal way, but also in your behavioral way. in that relation, in the interaction.
Yeah.
And if we live those words in the interaction, then we step into the next phase of humankind.
Yeah.
So not just talking about. I had a great. I did a few workshops with a American philosopher. He passed away a few years ago. Robert Solomon. And he's written a wonderful book about the difference between values and virtues. And for him, virtues are the values which are translated to behavior. So for me, that's a new word also. I had a discussion with a senior executive a few days ago, and for him it was a really big insight, and it made a change in the way he thought about values. Then he recognized it's not about the concept of values, it's about translating those values into my behavior. It sounds quite simple, but as long as we talk about values, we just talk about it. If we do not find a way to change those values to our behavior, nothing will change. So maybe a new word that we should use is virtues. Yeah. It's about living our values in our behavior. So if you and I live compassion, live trust, live harmony, live interconnection into our behavior, then something will happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and I completely agree, and I also see it in my daily practice. But it's a very different intervention to make when we speak about change, organizational change, societal change. We do not speak about these aspects, or we just touch upon them briefly, but the depth of which you are now speaking of them is it's maybe not new, but it's a more profound way of designing an intervention.
Yeah.
But that's very interesting, because I'm always speaking with leaders about, when you live those also in your business, then you create a different business. That's a very brave step to make, I think, to create your business on those values and virtues. Actually.
Yeah. Well, I think the good thing of this moment is that we all recognize that the crisis is an outcome of our behavior of the past, right? And I think the good moment, I worked with Karel Samson. He also died a few years ago, but he did a research to entrepreneurs who are very successful. He is a professor at Nairobi. He was a professor at Nairobi, professor entrepreneurship. And the outcome of his research were two main topics. The first one is it are the entrepreneurs and the leaders who will lead the change of society, because they have to adapt. And at a certain point, they will notice that if they do not adapt, that company will not survive. And I think that the crisis is opening that thought on a huge level of entrepreneurs and leaders. If we do not adapt, there will be another coronavirus. If we do not adapt and we are running old behavior, your company does not exist within a few years anymore. And that way of thinking is becoming common good in the head of leaders and entrepreneurs, which Karel 10, 15 years ago already concluded that. The second insight, which was a big surprise for him, was that the successful entrepreneurs did a lot of self-reflection. They reflected on themselves, on their leadership style, on the success of their company, on the outside world, and how that influences the inside world and their company. So, according to the fact that more and more leaders and entrepreneurs are open to change their mindset to be successful in the future, I think that gives us a huge platform to really create the new language, to develop new, not values, but virtues, values translating into behavior. So I think they do not only recognize the responsibility for themselves and for their company, but making that kind of growth, they will automatically feel responsible for the change in society. And I think that's the biggest chance we have right now, that the government, they do that already in the midst of this crisis, and we will have respect for that even after the crisis. But also the leaders and the entrepreneurs, they will take responsibility also. They have to. But they need guiding by how to. It's in their mind that the crisis is an outcome of old behavior, and if we stay in that old behavior, there will become a new crisis. That's in their mind, but they do not know how. And I can imagine that there is a responsibility for people like you and me, that we help them, we guide them to find the how. It's not about the what anymore. It's not about the necessity to do it. It's the how. How can I translate my new way of thinking into virtues, into new behavior? But again, I think that platform is there. The platform of leaders understanding that they have to change is dramatically growing because of the crisis.
Oh yeah, it mirrors us in the way we are adaptive or not.
Yeah.
Which is, it's an interesting word that you just now mentioned, adaptiveness. It's not a business parameter. It's not an existing or a mainstream parameter, but it is so very important. And also, when you speak about adaptability, to me, you're also mentioning the aliveness of a system that a business should or might be. While in our classical way of thinking about doing business, we classically tend to set up a business, organize a business in a closed system, moving from A to B, being predictable, being controllable, being manageable, while what you're asking, or what you're just now mentioning, is asking from organizations to let go of a bit of that control.
Yeah, but not only, we as a humankind, we were living in a closed system also, because we closed ourselves down for nature.
Yeah.
So it's not only the business who has to open up and the organization who has to open up, but it's even humankind that has to open up to adapt to nature.
Yeah.
Years and years ago, I had a wonderful dialogue with the Aboriginal. And there was a sentence he said with his typical voice, and I can get that voice back in my head, and I really love it. He said, "Tanno, you people, you can think that you can control nature, but nature controls you." And I think that we are in the middle of his wisdom right now, that we notice that. So as a humankind, we have to open our system as a humankind to adapt with nature again and accept the boundaries that nature shows us. So it's not only openness within the organizations and openness with the leaders, it's open ourselves as a human being, as a humankind. And again, that only happens when the individual, you and I, decide to open ourselves for nature, open ourselves for me, opening myself for you, seeing you as you are. And while you notice that I see you as you are, there will something change between you and me, right? Mm-hmm. There will be love between you and me. When I see you and you see me, there will be love. And I think feeling love for yourself, for the other person, for the environment, that will open the system as a humankind.
Yeah.
So for me, love, introducing new words in a business context, for me, love is a very, very important word to open the system for whatever. Yeah. Because if there's love between you and me, between you and other people, between me and Earth, if my mindset is driven by love and respect, things will change.
How would leaders lead from love?
It starts with love for themselves. They have to love themselves first, because how can I love someone else if I do not love myself? So it's about understanding what's going on in your inner world, and find peace with yourself, and not be this happy person, but accept who you are in both ways, in your qualities, but also accept your shadow, right? Just love yourself as you are, and when you love yourself as you are, you can love the other person, and you can love and respect the planet. You can feel love for society, but it starts with yourself, with your inner search and your inner respect for yourself. That's the main topic in my practice at the moment. That as I said before, a lot of leaders understand that they have responsibility for themselves, for the society, for the planet. They really understand that, but they do not know how. And that's the main question in my practice at the moment. Okay, what does this mean for myself? What do I have to change within myself to change the outside world? And 15 years ago, there was no topic at all. It was more about how can I become more efficient in what I do? How can I get my people to do what I want them to do? And now the main question is, what do I have to change within myself so I can react on the feeling of being responsible for the outside world? When I have my own place in France. When I invite my clients to come over for 2-3 days to France to reflect on these kind of questions, they love it. So that gives me a lot of confidence that the way of thinking, like we just are discussing, will happen.
Yeah, because it's our innate future to do so. Maybe. Yeah. I'm also wondering, because you and I both have the same experience. What we sometimes see is that it might not be for everybody. To have leaders lead from love might be a very difficult exercise when you might be suffering from narcissism or psychopathy, or which is very real in those structures too, and some of those structures are even built on the pathology thereof of these ways of suffering, I should say.
Yeah, I think in terms of leadership and people who are functioning in society as they are, pathology is a big word. I think it's a neurotism, which we call narcissism, right? I always ask my clients to do a survey, and what you will notice is that is a successful leader nowadays. He is pushing himself to the limit. That's the main characteristic. He wants to be seen. That's the main characteristic. But he also is looking for harmony in the interaction. That's also a main characteristic. And putting your, there are three characteristics who have a disconflict within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that there is narcissism in a pathological way. I think a lot of leaders have those patterns who are in conflict within themselves, which in modern psychology or modern articles we say it's a narcissist, right? But I don't think it's a narcissist. I think it's a person who is struggling with some kind of emotions in themselves, feeling the responsibility he or she has. And if they accept their shadow within themselves, right, those patterns in conflict, they can heal those patterns. But that starts with accepting it and not running away for it.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's another very interesting aspect. You're speaking about healing environments, actually, yeah? To approach this in a healing way. It doesn't really matter how we label it, but what's more important, I think, that you're mentioning now is how to provide for a healing response, which brings me to think that when organizations become a healing environment, not only for a leader but for all its.
I agree. Yeah. And a
What
healing environment.
is that a possibility for the future?
Oh, I'm sure. Before we have this discussion, I did a Skype coaching with a leader who said, "Okay, this is so stressful for my top team. What do I have to do?" And she exactly said that. What do I have to do to create a healing environment for my top team so they will build resilience to the situation where we are in now. So she feels responsible for her top team and understands that it's about the environment that she can facilitate to heal what's going on. So I fully agree on that. And I think more and more leaders are recognizing that it's just not your own healing, but it's also facilitating an environment in which your employees can heal.
Yeah.
And that's why topics like vulnerability or trust or compassion are more and more and more in the boardroom.
Mm-hmm. And I'm quite careful to be asking you this because I don't want to push anything into a form just yet. But still, what would a healing environment look like? What would be the main aspects?
For me, that's interaction based on virtues like compassion, like resilience, like trust, like harmony, like willing to discuss your shadow side and not hide yourself for your shadow side. Because it is what it is. The shadow side makes us who we are also. It's not a thing you don't, it's not a bad thing, your shadow side. It's who you are. So put it on the table. So basically it's always interaction, but what is leading within the interaction? And when those kind of virtues are leading, then you will create a healing environment.
Yeah.
If in our interaction in a business context, it's still KPIs, it's still pressure, it's still power. If that are the virtues, which were the virtues before, a few years ago, we will not change. But if the virtues are compassion, resilience, trust, love, then things will change.
Yeah.
And what I see is that that's that kind of language and behavior. I see that more and more and more and more.
Mm-hmm. Just one more question to go a little bit more deeply into that. So imagine an organization or a business being set up like that. What would its role be in society or for society?
It is society, only with a specific role, with a role of feed society, influence society, create society, guide society. But it is society. It's not a closed system from society. It is society.
Mm-hmm. There's a huge difference there already, because entities or businesses are now set up as separate entities with their own goals, their own ideas of moving forward and growing. But you're now picturing an idea that it's becoming part of a bigger ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It is a part of the ecosystem.
Yeah. Which might give the whole idea of purpose a more concrete direction. Yep. If we look at companies seeking for their purpose, then it's right there. What can you do in service of society?
Exactly, exactly. And I'm sure that society is going to force companies to think like that. Otherwise, they will not buy from them anymore. So, and that's where Karel Samson comes in. Entrepreneurs and leaders are recognizing that more and more and more. The coming years, customers will be very keen on the purpose from the company related to the ecosystem. And I'm quite sure about that, and I always discuss that in a pretty forced way with my clients. If you do not reinvent your virtues, you will not exist within a few years anymore, because customers want you to redefine your virtues. They do not accept behavior like we did before.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually just writing a little bit for a book that I'm contributing to about how companies, only the companies that will remain relevant are the companies that can sustain life in the purest sense.
Yeah.
Right?
I fully agree on that. Yeah.
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 It's a very interesting notion. I think this is reframing the whole business as usual.
Yeah.
Towards business unusual for now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But for me, that means that we are going back to centuries ago, where we just have craftsmanship, right? And I think it's about craftsmanship. I had a huge, wonderful discussion with one of my clients about craftsmanship, and he is a CEO of a big company, and he said, well, we have to go back to craftsmanship, because if we do not go back to craftsmanship, it's all about old routines, and it's about effectiveness instead of the soul of being the person who is good at something. And that good at something, that's what he brings to the company. He brings his soul to the company.
Well, that's a really wonderful notion.
It is. And that's why I believe I have a lot of talks like this with senior executive CEOs, and they are really, really open to this kind of reflections and their responsibility to live those kind of reflections within themselves and within the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree, and I'm also very curious to see what happens when we live that craftsmanship. And I feel compassion for particularly the big companies, like the corporates, that for an individual to have an impact from working from craftsmanship might be really very difficult, dealing with big systemic entities.
Yeah.
So what would your advice be for those people willing to move along this path, but having to deal with larger systems that also have, how would you say it, an influence of themselves?
Yeah. unleash the soul within.
What does that mean?
For me, no employee goes to his job in the morning to ruin the company, right? They stand up in the morning to live their life. Maybe not on an aware level, but that's why they stand up in the morning. Old companies has defined processes in which I, as an employee, choose to leave my soul at home, because when I'm creative and it does not fit within the processes, there will be some negative reactions from the old leader, right? So I leave my soul at home. So as a leader, what can a leader do to get the soul into the company again? Because every employee has a soul, and we have trained them in the past to leave their soul at home. So what can I do different to invite the employee to bring his soul into the company? And then then the company becomes society. How big it doesn't matter how big the company is. When I unleash the soul again into the company will change. The company will change itself. And how do I do that as a leader? Just by be empathetic to your employees. See them as who they are, and do not see them as a resource. See them as who they are. See their qualities, see their craftsmanships. See yourself as a leader in that process. So open up. Open up for humankind that's in your company already.
And that might be the biggest mirror maybe of the crisis today, is that we're now seeing that happen. What qualities reside in people? What's our human nature? So maybe we'll hold on to that.
How we recognize the necessity and the qualities of the nurse, or the firefighters, or the police, or the doctors.
Or just neighbors being neighborly.
Or just neighbor, exactly. Yeah. And when we started the discussion, when the crisis is over, we can make two decisions. We go back to old behavior, and we even do not wave to our neighbors anymore. Or we can choose, and that's an individual choice, we can choose to talk in new behavior, in new languages, and feel new languages, and show those language in your behavior.
Yeah.
And that's an individual decision. And I'm sure that leaders are able to guide individuals working in the organization to make that decision by living it by themselves.
Yeah. So, Tanno, thanks so much for your insights.
You're welcome.
I had a very inspiring talk now with you today. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the time having together.
Yeah. So I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.